In this video, we're going to generate another pattern. This pattern will be made up of a series of rectangles that have a variable placement within the grid. So I've got a few parts of this already added here. Don't forget that you will find the grid. This is a square grid on the vector tab, and the rectangle you will find on the curve, the primitive panel for the curve tab. All right, now what I'm going to do here is make this kind of long, skinny rectangle such that it's randomly placed within the grid, there. So right now, just by default, it's left aligned to the lower left-hand corner of each grid module. For my rectangle, I'm trying to make the height of it the same as the grid. So, you can adjust these variables as you would like. You don't have to do it this way. If I wanted it to be 8 high, for me, I would then need to increase the size of the rectangle. But again, it doesn't have to be like this in your assignment. Now, the next step is to add the transformation variable. So in this case, I'm using move, which you'll find under transform Euclidean. And I've just attached the grid of rectangles. We don't see anything happen on the screen here in the top view, but interestingly, when you go to the perspective view, the move has happened along the z-axis. I think it's 10 units above. Regardless of how far it is, we're going to be moving it down, so everything is existing on the z-axis at 0. I have some similar inputs here. These are eventually going to be plugged into the translation vector. As I just showed you, the default would be to place these rectangles 10 units or whatever above their current position. So when I click on move here and when I click on rectangles here, they're both in the same position. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using this randomization tool. This part is very similar to the circles. I have a domain which sets up a kind of a range of possibilities. I have a number here that we'll be adjusting later. We won't really see what happens till we start to plug some things in. But what I want these rectangles to do is shift along the x-axis. So what I'm going to need to do is bring in something that allows me to change that setting. So if you go to vector and click on the vector panel, what we're going to be doing is changing the x vector, or using that for the randomization. So when I start to connect these, and if you wanted to shift the rectangles vertically, you would have used a construct y vector, but I'm interested in the left to right. So and as you can see, as I shift these from, let's bring these both to 0, you can start to see how the range begins to show graphically. Okay, so we're going to need to do a few steps to get the pattern to look as I had suggested it would look. Just to sort of simplify what we see, I'm going to turn the preview off for the grid and for the original rectangles. So we're only seeing the ones generated randomly. And what you can see is that each row is shifting in this kind of random fashion, but I want every one of them to randomize. So one step that we're going to need to add is called flatten tree. So I'm going to type in flatten, and the tree is basically the structure here. And so instead of going directly from the grid to the rectangles, what we're going to do is, because it's, I guess by default, kind of putting them in these sets, you know, set 1, set 2, set 3, and applying the randomization to each of those sets. We want to make it apply to each geometry individually. So I'm going to connect it in place of just the direct connection. Now we still don't have the variables that we're looking for the placement of the rectangles, and that's going to require a few additional setting changes. So one thing that's happening that's kind of limiting what will happen here is the number of random values. It's only going up to 10. So it kind of goes through that and then it stops. So if I want it to apply to all these, I have to increase the number of random values. So I'm going to double click on this and I'll change mine to 50 and say okay. And now if I increase it to the number of items in my grid, you can see I'm sliding up a little bit incrementally. I want to go until it starts to create a duplicate, and then I'll bring it back. So 24. So if you multiply, what is that? 6 times 4, that's how we're getting that number. Now I haven't set up a kind of a variable for the random, the seed. So, you know, I can make a copy of this one that has 50 possible variables and connect it in. And then as I slide it, I can kind of choose one of the patterns that I like, the randomization that's happening, and make that one the one that I, you know, take further. So that's basically how you can sort of randomize. Now, last one we did was a scale randomization. This is using the move transformation. And again, there are a number of ways that you can do it. I was just interested in looking at how those rectangles can shift from left to right, but you could play with other options for this.